Now it is my distinct pleasure to introduce Richard Guy Wilson, a renowned architectural historian and professor emeritus at the University of Virginia, who was born and raised in Los Angeles in a house designed for his parents by Rudolf Schindler. After teaching stints at other institutions of higher learning, Richard came to the University of Virginia in 1976, where he received the Outstanding Professor Award in 2001. If you study architectural history, you'll find his writings at every turn. He's written, co-authored, edited, and contributed to more than a dozen books. If you were lucky enough to have him as a teacher, you know he could wax poetic on subjects ranging from Thomas Jefferson to the American Renaissance, from the Prairie School to the Colonial Revival and modernism. And he's always known how to bring the best out in his students, as you will see from Jody Lahendro. Richard has said of Charles Goodman that his architectural work formed the basis of the generic modern American house and school widely imitated in every part of this country. Thanks so much for being with us this morning. And Richard, it's your turn.
Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you. Can you hear me? Okay, thank you very much for that very lovely introduction, and I am very glad to be here. As you can see on the screen here, there is going to be a lot of stuff in my talk, and I'm going to take a sweep, broad, maybe get a little narrow here and there, at the tremendous changes that took place between 1940, let's say, and 1980, and the different types of architecture that emerged. And of course, in architectural history and historians, we like to categorize everything and make little categories, and this is this, and this is that, and name it and so forth. But the real problem is that the term that we use for mid-century modern isn't really just one sort of an image, one sort of a thing, that it is a variety of different elements and so forth that come into it. And so that is what I am going to try and take up here in my talk. Now, one of the issues is, of course, and here it is, what is mid-century modern, as I just mentioned a minute ago. And I would argue that these two here, is there anybody here who has not been to one of these houses? Okay. But anyway, I would say that the Glass House up in New Canaan by Philip Johnson, who was one of the major figures that strode across the American architectural scene in the mid and the later 20th century. And then, of course, Mies van der Rohe, who really strode across the scene, that these two houses right here, in a certain sense, to many, 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 many people, are what is modern American houses of the mid 20th century. But of course, really, are they? And are they really something? Does anybody want to live in them? Are they comfortable? What are they, and what are they like? That they are, of course, they're both owned by the National Trust, and are open to the public now, and they do give you a view, but the reality of this is does anybody ever actually live in the damn things? And I will just note that, of course, if you've ever been up to New Canaan, there is not too far from the house. This is the so-called guest house, also by Philip Johnson, but that's basically where he spent most of his time at night. He didn't sleep there in the Glass House, that this is where it is. Or on the right, I just put up two quotes from Edith Farnsworth, who it was her house that we were just looking at right there on the right. But this is what she had to say, about Mises' very famous quote, that less is more. And as you can see there, we know that less is not more, it's simply less, that there is not anything that is there. And it does go to sort of a testimony that these two buildings, the Farnsworth House and the Glass House, are so quintessentially American, and yet at the same time, are they really anything that anybody wants to live? So what we're going to do in my talk here, and as I say, it's going to be sprawling around a little bit. Hopefully, it won't go on too long. Is to look at some of the other things that were going on in these years, and in particular, of course, we're here, and we're going to be looking at Charles Goodman, and this is one of his designs for national homes there on the right. But we're going to also be looking at what went on out there in California, and the Western Ranch House, and all of this. Because what this is that I would argue that between these two here, that they are really two of the more important things that really helped to transform American domestic architecture in the later 20th century. The other thing is that we're going to pay some attention to is this, and the scale and the change that happened. The change that happened outside of practically every American city. Yes, there had been suburbs before and so forth, but still the way that these things begin to sprawl out there and to really change the way that a lot of people live. Now, as I just mentioned a minute ago, the term suburb goes back many centuries, and of course is suburban. But it is really in the 19th century, and it is here in this country, though there is some people that here that will correct me and say, well, there was a little something over there in England and so forth. But that it is really in this country with these two projects right here, Llewellyn Park in New Jersey, which is on the left, which is just outside of New York City, and was a development. A.J. Davis was very much involved. Alexander Jackson Davis is very much involved in this. He had actually his own house there. And as you can see, what you have is you have the sort of the curving streets. There is sort of a park, which is that green thing that runs up through the center of it. And I should say that the Llewellyn Park is still there today. It's expanded considerably. There's only, I think, 2 of the original buildings that are left. Everything else has been replaced, but it's still there. And then a few years later, outside of Chicago, Frederick Law Olmsted designed this Riverside, Illinois, which is sort of an expansion, certainly, of what you see there in Llewellyn Park, but the sort of the park-like element that runs up through the center of it, the curving streets and so forth, that these are 2 of the seminal, and these are really seminal in what changes American architecture and the way that people live and the way that the way they're going to live, not necessarily in the city, but out there in the suburb or in the so-called garden suburb. And then, as I've already mentioned, it is, of course, those are going on, but there are things that really shifts here in the 1940s with the huge expansion of the American population. And of course, we'd always been the center of everything, but now America is really the center of world power, tremendous amount of wealth that is flowing in, and where are people going to go? And so that they go into the suburbs like this. And so in this suburban development, one of the most important developments, I think, of all time in post-World War II is by this guy right there that is on the cover of of Time magazine, and that is Mr. Levitt. And he is the man. He had a New York firm. His father had started a firm. They were builders and so forth, but that he really got going on the idea of, really, can we do this? And so out on Long Island, and now it's called Levittown, but it was out a considerable distance. He lays out this huge tract out there, and it is so popular and so forth that, of course, as you can see, that he winds up here on the cover of Time magazine. And when you get in the cover of Time magazine, that means that you're really important. And what it is I say the family had gotten going, and in 1948, when just right after they began to lay out Levittown, there were about 30 houses per day that were being put up. By 1951, they had over 17,400 houses that had been built out there. And that's sort of just 17,000. That's just sort of an indication here of the tremendous sort of expansion and so forth that's taking place. And what you do have at Levittown, and as I say, this is extremely important. There's a lot of people that sneer at Levittown and so forth, but that this really does impact American architecture, American cities in considerable ways. And as you can see here in these on the two images I have up, that you do have the central sort of artery that is coming out from the city, and the trains did come out. But then off of the artery, you have the streets that are laid out, and these sort of curving types of things, with the idea that there would be, this would be sort of, quote, a garden type of a suburb, that you would be living out there, living out there in nature. It was, as already indicated, it was very, very popular. And here, these are some images from Life magazine. And as you can see here, there he is at the sales pitch, selling to some lady, and her child is next to him. But that this is really, this is known, not just nationwide, but worldwide, as a sort of a change. And of course, very important in this is the commercial aspect, the way that people is making money, the way that Mr. Levitt is making money in all of this. And it's also, I think, important to keep in mind the way that they were built. And as you can see here, and this is this type of construction and so forth, but the way that they sort of mass produce the different elements and so forth that are being done, that isn't just something with a couple of carpenters out there putting up a house like that, but rather than that, it is just very, 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 very clearly that this is really part of what's been going on out there in Detroit for many years, or Chicago, the mass production. Now, the houses that were produced in Levittown are a couple of varieties. These are some of the earliest examples here, and as you can see, these are rather small, about 1,000, 1,100 square feet, something like that. A cape, basically a single story within a little bit of space up above for a bedroom or something like that. But in the basic house, as you see in the plan that we have up here, you come in the front door, there is a staircase, the kitchen's to the right, you have a living room, and then you have two bedrooms that are to the back with the bath. And as I say, then there was a little bit of space that was up above. And this is something that is, as I say, that is really very, very important, because they do once again this really impacts in a broad sort of way buildings that are going to be built all across the United States. And so here's just a couple more as they begin to add more buildings to this, expand them a little bit. The one on the left, as you can see, here we have the new two-story at 1,700 square feet. A little bit less than $15,000 for it. Or on the right, this is another model that is expanded a little bit with a little bit more space in there. And the whole point is that this is really to be this is really to be done. Here they did have some competitions over the way that you would redo your interior or have your interior done. And so here is a competition held in 1954 with, on the left, is the first prize with the lady in the red. On the right is the second prize, which I'm always surprised is the second prize, because there you can see there is the radio set into the wall there. Television quite hasn't appeared yet, but it's going to appear. If you do go to Levittown, and I should say that Levitt went on and built a variety of other subdivisions that are scattered around the East Coast, but if you do go to Levittown today, you will see that there not too many of the original houses are left, that they've all been expanded in one sort of way or another, but there is one that can be found, and that's a picture I took a couple of years ago down the lower right. But as I say, it is, and this is another sort of an element to keep in mind when we do study American, especially domestic architecture or houses, is that how much we change our houses, how much our houses change over time, and what it is and what it's like. Levittown is so popular that I hope that some of you know this cartoon. It's in the Washington Post. But anyway, this is Bill Griffith, Zippy. But Bill Griffith was born there in Levittown. And as you can see, Levittown, though, upsprang the Aboriginal name, the parades, the flags, flying drums, beating lawnmowers, mowing my city. Oh, my city, oh, Levittown. And I just couldn't resist. I have to put in another one right here. But here it is. Bill going back to his house there in Levittown, and that they moved into in 1952, and then what happened to the damn thing happened to it over the years. And at the end, in case you can't see, that's his mother coming out and saying, you know, where have you been? And he said he got lost in the twilight zone. But anyway, Levittown is, as I say, I'm emphasizing here, is so important in really American architecture. Is it architecture? Well, there are a lot of people out there that are shaking their heads and so forth, but it is so important in American domestic life. Just to put in, you can't do a talk on American architecture without having in the guy with the three names, because he's it. I mean, he's up there somewhere looking down right now at us and saying, you know, are you going to pay any attention to me, and so forth. But it is important to note that Wright did create his Broadacre City, which was a scheme for organizing outside of the American city. This is 1931. Of course, you know what's been going on in 1929. This is his attempt he's really fallen off the cliff, and he's trying to get himself back, trying to get his architecture back. And so he creates this model city, Broadacre City, or it is known as Usonia. And then he publishes a book later on. Parts of this are published in different places, but then in 1954, he brings together a lot of this stuff in the book, The Natural House. But what it is, of course, that this is a model type of a suburb for Americans, though he includes a lot of other elements that we normally don't have in our suburbs and so forth. But this is the way of trying to integrate, and this is the important thing, I think, in the American suburban mind and so forth, is this idea that we do have a little bit of nature here, that we're not just totally in a city that has no nature around us, that there is some nature that's out there, not just parks, but the garden and tree-lined streets. And of course, I know that all of you know this, but just to point out that he does do some houses. And this is the first Usonian house that he did. He did two houses for Mr. Jacobs up there in Madison, Wisconsin, but this is normally called Usonian number one. And the idea behind this was that the house would be built on a concrete slab that would have radiant heating in it. that the walls and so forth would be prefabricated elements, that there would be plenty of glass to be able to see outside. You would have a flat roof, and you'd have an open plan on the interior. And so this is Herb Jacobs #1, which is the first Usonian house. Of course, the one that we all know is not very far from us right here. And it's an interesting story in its own way that I won't go into all of it. But the Pope Leahy house is about Usonian #3, Usonian #4, something like that. But once again, you get the plan here where you have the carport. And then it's typical with Wright, when he brings you in, he sort of compresses you down a little bit. And then you go up some steps, and you have the living room that opens up, as you can see. And then off to the left, you have a gallery with a couple bedrooms that are along there. And the story in this house, as I'm sure many of you know, is a complicated sort of thing of rebuilding and et cetera. But this is an interesting picture that I took a number of years ago showing the different ways in which the walls were fabricated here and put together. And here we go. This is the construction that's going on there. And of course, his furniture. Is it comfortable? Well, that's a question that a lot of people are going to ask you, and so forth. But it's his idea that I provide it all. And then just to note that, of course, what it is that it is one of the very first. It was put on a national register and was actually made a national landmark. That was saved. They were putting around the big beltway and so forth. It was in the way. It was moved. That the government got involved in this. And that's a Charlotte Pope there with, as I say, Secretary of Interior Stuart Udall talking about moving the house. And this is really, if you think about it for a minute, this is really, really unusual. I mean, this is 1964, that they're going to save a house that is not even 40 years old, that they're going to move the thing. Of course, there's the free-name guy, but still at the same time, it does point out that the sort of a transformation that is going on, I think, is going on. There are about 60 Usonian houses. There's a book on all of Frank Lloyd Wright's houses and so forth, and I counted up about 60 that are in there that were built. They were built out of the 500 odd buildings of his that actually were built. Another very, very important transformation is the California Arts and Architecture magazine, or known as Arts and Architecture magazine, published out in Los Angeles, and the involvement of a couple of individuals in it. The editor of it was John Itenza, and he's the man on the right. And the man on the left with the cigarette in his mouth is Charles Eames. And of course, we'll go into what Eames is. I assume everybody knows what he did. But anyway, these two individuals here are also very involved, I think, in transforming what American architecture looks like in these years. And just to note the covers, if you've never looked at them, that the covers, this is Ray Eames, Charles's wife. And unfortunately, in an awful lot of the things that are ascribed when you see Charles Eames, you don't see Ray, but apparently she was working very, very closely with Charles on a lot of the different designs. But she did these incredible covers. I mean, if you just think about these covers in the 1940s, the way they must have shocked an awful lot of Americans that you're doing something like this. And so anyway. And also involved in this a little bit is Errol Sarnon, the son of Eliel Sarnon, who, of course, would go on to build a big building not too far from here. But was involved in this. But the design of the furniture and so forth. And just a note here, there's the furniture, in case you don't know. Herman Miller picks them up in 1946. And then to really show how well it is done and so forth is that you do get the big exhibit at the Museum of Modern Art in New York City in 1946. It really helps to bring this sort of organic shaped type of wood furniture really into the American population. So let me think, yeah, here we go. Oh, I just put this in, I couldn't resist, Playboy. Playboy? Yeah, okay. But anyway, this is a very interesting picture that they put in, as you can see, of the range of these architects and designers that are stretched across there. And Eames is the person that is seated looking on the back of the chair there, looking forward to us. And over there in the blue chair, that's Errol Sarnan. And the other men in here, such as Nielsen and Harry Bertoya and Jens Rensom, they also designed very important furniture. Very important furniture in those years. But one of the things that is really important is that magazine that I introduced, what did I do here? Okay, there we go. That I introduced just a minute ago, Arts and Architecture magazine. Atenza began this idea that we're going to provide a set of model homes for Americans. And this is known as the case study. And there were 11 of these houses that were done over the years, and commissioned different architects to do them, basically California-based architects. Mr. J.R. Davidson, who did case study number 1, is sort of forgotten today, but he was a major figure striding across the stage back in the 1940s, especially out in California. And what it is essentially a single-story type of a house. There's a carport, you can see there on the plan that there's a carport that's right down here. This is the entrance of going in like this, as you can see, and it, of course, is furnished here with the Eames, Eames's furniture and so forth, and that this is provided as sort of a model for what it is that Americans ought to be doing, and so. Here is a picture of it. Most of the houses are a single story. There's a couple of exceptions that you see in half a minute here. But this is, I'd say, this is a very, very influential design that catches on. Not necessarily, Davidson does about 1,100 houses that are out in California, but also is picked up just by builders and so forth. And this becomes sort of a model for a lot of California subdivisions, and then slowly spreads east. And as you can see, once again here, the structural system on it, rather simple, a truss roof, metal columns, the concrete floor pad, and then a lot of windows and so forth, that opened up. Now, as I say, they commissioned a number of different people to do it, but of course, one person had to get his nose into it, and that's Charles Eames. And this is case study number 8. In Pacific Palisades. It is still there. Anybody visited there? Okay, it's still there. It's worthwhile, really, a visit to go to. But this is it's credited to Charles Eames, though Ray Reams, I think, had a big influence in it. And it's built on a plot of land in Pacific Palisades overlooking the ocean. And it's a little unusual for all of the others in that the amount of metal that is in it, there isn't really too much, and it's a 2-story sort of a structure. And you can see here, and very, very abstract on the exterior, an almost de-style type of contrast of the different squares and so forth. It's sort of Mondrian is creeping around a little bit over here and so forth. Here's the plan of it. And you see at one end you do have the studio, which is down here at this end. It's sort of open here in the center, though there's an upstairs that goes across. This is the living and dining and so forth. And then there's an upstairs, which you'll see here. There's a view looking down to the Pacific Ocean from the house. And then on the exterior, this is one of the structural elements that is there, and really rather dramatic that's put in. That this is really, at that point in time, is really one of the most dramatic things that are done. This house becomes extremely popular and appears in, not just in Arts and Architecture magazine, and I should have noted that Esther McCoy, a very important California-based architectural critic, published a book of the case study houses, but it's picked up other places and published. And this is a quote here from Rayner Banham. Some of you may know Rayner Banham, a very, very important architectural writer, a critic, English-based and so forth. But he writes this in 1976, that my first consciousness of any specific architecture in Los Angeles occurred almost exactly 20 years before writing these words. And that experience was not unique. The Ames House has had a profound effect on many of the architects of my generation in Britain and Europe. It became the most frequently mentioned point of pilgrimage for intended visitors to Los Angeles. And he goes on and talks about this, but just how important this house was at that point in time to a lot of architects and critics. Now, actually, how many people wanted to live in it? Well, that's another question right here. As you can see here, you have the two-story space at one end of the living room with some floating paintings by Ray Eames that are overhead, and then turning the other direction, looking down to upstairs where the bedrooms are. But it was really an experience. It was really an experience, in many ways. They went on to design, there are a number of case study houses. Here is case study number 9, and this was designed by the Eameses with Errol Sarnon, and this is a house for John Atenza in Pacific Palisades. Unfortunately, it has disappeared, but it's basically a single-story type of a structure, as you can see in the plan that is there, with a the way that it is set in like this, and the way that nature invades on a whole variety of different sides, And then on the interior, this is one of the earliest of the sort of conversation pit type of houses, as you can see there. And I should note that the photographs here were done by Julius Schulman, who was an extremely important California-based architectural photographer. And he went out and shot all of these, and he went around and also, and I should have mentioned that there is a case study house done by Richard Neutra and others and so forth, but that he really helps to spread the notion of the California architecture. And then, of course, that rather extraordinary fireplace that you have here. Here is case study number 16, and this is done by Craig Elwood, who emerges in these years as a really important California-based architect. And this is up on a hilltop with a tremendous view that is out and has a steel frame. And then what is, I think, I've always been intrigued by this, is that you do have this brick wall with those elements that are here. And this is apparently a plaything for the kids to climb up on and so forth. But this tremendous view that is out, as you can see, in the outdoor and the outdoor seating area. And here, here's a plan of it, and the carport is over here. You can see, these are the view terraces and so forth, the living terraces. This is really the way you enter through the carport and so forth like this. Come in here, the living room. Here's the TV, that's very, very important, but the view and so forth that goes out. And of course, is the Eames furniture and so forth that's here. And here's just a couple more views of this house. The way, I mean, of course, this is really modern. You don't have a damn thing laying around anywhere. It is cleaned up beyond belief. Number 21. This is by the California architect Pierre Koenig, a very important figure in his day. And again, it's interesting the way that all of these things are integrated into it, that you have the carport that is right here, as you can see. And you have this sort of a water feature that stretches around it and so forth. And then you have the interior with the views that are stretching out. And it's a very, very compact type of a thing, as you can see. Dining room here, this is a living area, et cetera, there, and a couple of bedrooms that are back there. And just a couple more pictures. I know I'm probably stressing too much these case study houses, but I can't emphasize, to me at least, but to how many architects these were really, really important, that these are really important in these years. Here's number 22, also up on the hilltop. Pierre Koenig did this with this, here's the steel frame, as you can see, the stretch out that goes in this tremendous view that is off there. And then this house gets extraordinary attention because one of the most famous photographs was taken there, and that's a self-portrait of Julius Schulman, the photographer, up there with the camera obviously set back. And you can see, if you look very, very, very carefully here, here is the thing leading over to his camera so he can set it off and get this self-portrait. But again, there's a pool, as you can see, that is here. And I mean, do you want to get out of the pool? Well, you just flop over and you're down the hillside quite a direction. You couldn't build this today, I don't think. Here we are on the interior and taking a look at this very amazing sort of a fireplace that was built there. And then they're waiting for a date. They're waiting for the boyfriends to show up. Now, there are a lot of other attempts to bring modernism or elements of, quote, modernism, which isn't a style, it's just sort of an attitude towards the American public. And I'm not going to run through all of these, but just to show you just one right here. As you can see from this is Better Homes and Gardens, and it was the cover. And, 19 pages of ideas for, yes, this is the home for all America. And then what we have here on the plate, here on the left is a pitched roof, sort of a flat roof type of thing, a more pitched roof, and another one's over here, but just the way that you could sort of handle this. And then here is the variations in all of this. And Mr. Little, who designed these, they did about 100 different houses. There's a list that is in Better Homes and Gardens. This is, if anybody wants to look at afterwards, I have a reprint of part of it that is up here. But there are about 100 houses that Mr. Little did. And as I say, this is the way that the information really gets out there to an awful lot of Americans and so forth, is through this. However, there's something else that's going on that is rather important, and that is the development of the so-called ranch house, or the other names that can be called about it and so be put on it. It's basically a California-based thing, but it does spread out and it spreads across the country, and I would argue is really one of the most important innovations. To some people, the most boring innovations, but that really happens in these years. And the person who is involved in this is a guy by the name of Cliff May. Now, the origins of the ranch house are manifold, and they do go back to the Spanish Mexican settlement out in the Southwest and California and so forth, and buildings such as this here, on the left, the Cornelius, or it's known as the Fremont House, up in Santa Barbara, which, as you can see, is basically a single story. You've got this porch that stretches along the front of it. You have a big chimney that is in one end, and then this is sort of disappears, we might say, but then begins to be picked up by those Pasadena creeps, the brothers Green, Charles and Henry Mather Green. They're not creeps. They're very, very important figures. We all know them because of the Gamble House in Pasadena. But they did do this Bandini bungalow, which I'm showing you there on the right, which is a sort of a ranch house type of a layout. As you can see, it's out of wood. It's around a sort of a courtyard. But they are sort of they're sort of fooling around with this. And it then sort of, I would say, it sort of disappears. There are some oddball sorts of buildings that are pop up out there in California, but not really too much happens until the 1940s, and a man by the name of Cliff May appears on the scene. And Cliff May designs about 17,000 of these things that are spread all over the place out there. A number of different developments and so forth, such as this one here you can see on the left, the Sullivan Canyon Ranches, $6,500 on a 3/4 acre site. But he's also picked up by Sunset Magazine, which was the sort of homeowners magazine out there in California, and publishes in there endlessly. And then they pick up some of his designs and put them together in a book called The Western Ranch Houses. Now, Cliff May, just to note, was a builder. He learns architecture through working for builders. He is never a registered architect. There's never an AIA or anything like that. He is basically from San Diego and grows up and gets into this sort of the mythology, because it is in these years that the mythology of the Western, both the novels and of course movies are going to be developed, and all of this begins to grow. And he expands from San Diego up the coast and so forth into Los Angeles, and becomes very, very, very popular. And apparently he was an extremely charming individual. I never was able to meet him, but I've met several people that did know him and said that, as you can see with that smile there, he knew how to persuade you to do what it is that he wanted. So anyway, this is his house in Los Angeles, which is a little bit unusual for the ranch houses in the sense that it is, as you can see, it's a sort of a V-shaped type of plan with the central section and the two wings that come off. You come in through the motor court and so forth, as you can see. But it's a single-story type of a structure. You don't have to climb up any stairs or anything like this. Easy sort of a movement that goes between rooms and et cetera, et cetera. And it is, as they say, it becomes very, very, very popular. And so anyway, he is picked up by Sunset Magazine, as I said already, which was the major homeowners magazine out there in the West Coast, so it did spread east, and begins to publish articles in there, or they pick up on his stuff and publish articles in there. And so that you begin to get this ranch house that really does, this ranch house that really spreads out. And the features of this type of a thing is, of course, that it's on a lot, that you do have vegetation and so forth that is around it. It's a single-story, low roof line, simple, open interior floor plans in it. There's always an attached garage to it, or a carport or something like that. Plenty of windows with sliding doors and so forth. And the exteriors can be of a variety of different things, whether it is going to be of wood, brick, or stucco, but with plenty of glass. And so this is giving you some sort of a view of what it would be like to be living there with this tremendous open sort of expanse. From the inside, you can come out, you can sit there on the right. As you can see, this is an outdoor seating area, and this is where you could have your meal and so forth. But inside, you have this tremendous sort of connection, with nature. And this really is, I just can't emphasize how much this seems to be just so important, become so important in these years. There are some of his houses that become a little bit more complicated, such as this one here, which has this open, it's a glass, but this central section that you have like this. And he is picked up by important clients, and he becomes the architect for many of Hollywood's luminaries up in the Hollywood Hills, the Sunset Hills, and so forth. And so he is really on the road. He's really on the road, on the road to fame. Anyway, just a couple more pictures here, just to sort of emphasize what it is that we're looking at, and it's really a rather extraordinary thing. And of course, the pictures. This isn't anybody living in a damn thing. You would have something a little bit more spread around, probably, but still at the same time, it gives you a sense of the way that there is an American aesthetic that's developed. And here's another one here up on the top of the hill with a tremendous, you've got this big gable, low pitched gable at the end with all of the glasses you can see looking inside. Notice the chairs in the dining room. They are not chairs that the Eameses would have approved of in any sort of a way. But then here is your view. Here's your view. Here's your view that goes out. And so what it is that I'm trying to show here is that there is a development in this country in the 1940s, well, beginning back a little bit in the 1930s, and it isn't just only the three-name guy, Frank Lloyd Wright, that there's a lot of other people that are involved in this that really transforms American architecture and also the way that the city or the suburb is laid out and what it is that we're going to try and live. And so just to note that this is where we're going to be going. I'm not going to say too much say anything about this here, but just to say that Holland Hills is what we're here all about. Is very much a product of all of this, and it is something that is very well known. And in case you don't know, and I'm sure somebody else is going to show this, Life magazine, 1951, best houses under $15,000, and of course it's Holland Hills that they're talking about. And so anyway, just a couple of pictures. We're going to be hearing more about this in a minute. But then just to note, it isn't just out there, that it spreads other places, and there are more things that really ought to be done. There's, of course, other California subdivisions, such as the Eichler homes. He was a big developer, more up in the Bay Area. This Palo Alto house there, but a part of a big development that he did there. Or other places like in Denver, Colorado, the Arapahoe Acres. You can see the same sort of thing going on. So with that, I am going to stop and say thank you very much. And
don't go away. People may have questions.
well, you got to wake up first.
I have one question for you, Richard.
Yeah.
Were the case study houses intended as one-offs?
Yeah. Yes.
They were intended as one-offs that would inspire whatever.
Well, they would go on, and some of the architects, I didn't show you all of them, but as I say, J.R. Davidson, number one, did a whole bunch of houses that are scattered all over West Coast out there, and they're basically sort of in the same sort of a mode. I just didn't want to go into showing all the ones that I can show you. So then you do get some specials, like the Eames house. I mean, who's going to do the Eames house? Neutra does a house which I didn't show you, but Richard Neutra, in case you don't know, of course, very, very important figure. His is a more modest sort of a thing. And I think there were about 7 of the Neutra houses that were done, something like that. But the other houses, A. Quincy Jones and so forth, yes, they were built and are around and so forth. So, yeah. Yes? What were the purposes of the frame? Was always a vertical frame, basically in a lot of these, a vertical type of a frame, and then that allowed you to have big glass windows and so forth, and that your walls really aren't structural support, which traditionally, of course, the wall had been. Yeah. I'm sorry. Yes.
Ernest Hemingway grew up in Oak Park, Illinois.
Here, maybe we're going to take the.
Yeah. Ernest, can we pass the mic?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm having a hard time here.
Oh, I understand. I can't hear you. You got that. Just turn it up.
Where is the question?
Here, I think it slides in.
Sir, can you hear me?
Pardon?
Ernest Hemingway, I believe, grew up in a place called Oak Park, Illinois.
Yeah.
Was that a kind of proto-suburb? I'm thinking about your opening remarks this morning.
Oak Park, Illinois, and of course that's where Frank Lloyd Wright was from and built his house and so forth there, right?
Yeah, I thought there was that connection.
Yeah, well, I mean, that was a suburb and so forth, but we're talking there about later 19th century, I think most of the buildings that are there into the very early 20th century, and wasn't quite the same sort of a development as some of these suburbs here that we're talking about.
It's no Levittown, obviously.
Which is a mass-produced type of thing. But once again, just to say that the idea of the suburb for Americans is really it's an American invention. There were some suburbs that are over there in the old world and so forth, but nothing on the scale that begins here with the Welland Park, goes on with Riverside, Illinois, and then Whammo. It really catches on. And I mean, I can't go into all of the different suburbs that are developed in those years, and so it really becomes a big deal. Yeah.
Odd to think of Hemingway as a child of the suburbs, but I suppose I should.
As a child of the suburbs.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yes. Yeah.
And, sir, would you define Usonian? What is it?
Usonian stands for United States.
North America.
What?
United States of North America.
Okay, pass the.
Okay.
United
Yeah.
States of North America is Usonian.
And one last question. Sorry, and then I'll shut up. The Bandini bungalow, the image you showed us, man, oh man, that looks like a Roman villa. I think that's the true ancestry of that particular image. Just a comment.
Yeah, no, there is a certain element of that creeps in. I mean, Americans want to be a lot of different things, you know. And, I mean, what is the most important thing that we have that defines us? Well, our car? Well, no. But I'd say our house is really is really a defining element of most people and where they live. I mean, or defining element of who they are is what their house is, and you know, that's part of it. And if you really want to stand out, then yeah, you build something that's unusual, or you decorate the front of it, or you paint it up in some sort of a way and make it weird. You know.
Other questions? I'll bring the mic to you.
Oh.
Sunset Magazine daughter, yes. Okay. Could you tell us what it was like growing up in a Schindler house?
As was said, my parents had commissioned a house. Actually, my father commissioned the house before he married my mother. in 1937 in the Silver Lake district of Los Angeles. And I lived there until I was about 8 years old, and then we moved out to Riverside, California, and he commissioned a house from J.R. Davidson, which did case study number 1. So what's it like? Well, I have to argue about this every night when I fall asleep. I mean, what it is that grew up in these different sorts of places. And one thing was in the Schindler house in particular, it was on a hillside, and the living room was a glass floor to ceiling, and the drop was 40 feet off of that. So I was not for a while, for a number of years, us children weren't allowed up to that close to the window and so forth. But I mean, I would say that yes, it was very influential in many ways, and but of course I rebelled against some of it, and have done some Victorian things and all of that, and so.
There's a question up here.
You spoke of the Farnsworth house and the Eames's house in Pacific Palisades as being less than livable, or who wants to live here? I need to hear a little bit more about that, just in terms of, are you posing that these were sort of the pure models that were less than livable, and that the production houses were sort of more suited, or I mean, it seems like those guys in a way were asking, in some ways, people to change their lives to live in these houses, so that they were proposing, rather than accommodating a lifestyle, they were saying things need to change.
Change your lifestyle.
Could you speak a little more about that?
Well, I think that there was certainly an intention among certain, and quote, what's wrong? Anyway, what's going on? This second, excuse me, sorry. There we go. There certainly was an intention among many modernists of a certain element that we're going to change the world. The architecture is a defining sort of a thing. And certainly I would say with the Farnsworth house, Mies was part of that type of a thing. But the reality is that, I mean, who wants to live in a totally glass house with everything around you? And as I mentioned, Philip Johnson in his house, I mean, he actually spent most of his time, I visited him there when he was still in there a couple of different times, and I was a little mean, but I did ask him, I said, where is it you really live? And he said, you're not... Not to repeat this, but anyway, no. I mean, it was the guest house, and there were some other structures on the property too. He erected a thing for his art a sculpture gallery and a painting gallery, and there's other things. And then there's an old house on the property as well, and I think that that's basically where he spent most of his time. I mean, there is accounts of people claiming that they came and that he was still in his bed, but I find that really difficult to believe, you know. I mean, because what would you do? Walk in the door and there he is, you know. Anyway, but what it does go to show is, in one level, this attempt to sort of revolutionize, but the other thing is it goes to show just how those houses are really intended to be showpieces. You know, they're to just knock your feet off and so forth. And whether you're going to live like that, no way whatsoever. And so that's one of the that's one of the things I think that's really important about those. Yeah.
And it was occupied by Doug and Linda Wood. And I have to tell you, they love living there.
Yeah.
Now, had to have the money because it had a huge property
Yeah.
and privacy around it.
Yeah.
But it was pretty private on the lower level where the bedrooms were.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, and well, anyway, I can go on for quite a bit here about New Canaan, Connecticut, because that becomes the centerpiece for modern domestic architecture from the New York architects in the later 1940s, 1950s. There's just a hodgepodge of other weird buildings that are around there. Yeah.
I have a question, and I have the mic. So I wanted to ask, I noticed in the first Cliff May, or one of the Cliff May images that you showed, included a carport.
I'm sorry, I'm having a hard time hearing this.
How about now? Is that better? Can you hear me now? How is that? It's good? One of the Cliff May images showed a carport, and the first case study house project showed a carport. The Levittown projects did not show carports, and so I'm just wondering, can you speak to the origins of the carport, and did it indicate some sort of feeling that the American public was having about their cars and the importance of them?
The importance of carports.
Levittown, no. Well, carports is something that is invented in these years and so forth, and that was one of the issues with where you put your damn car and so forth. And Levittown, they didn't take care of that very well. If you ever go there, I mean, now you do have garages on some of the properties and so forth. I mean, how many houses in Levittown are original is just not very many. I mean, they've all been altered, but that's the American way. But yeah, the car is extremely important, and that's one of the problems with a lot of, American architects, is that they don't pay attention to those sorts of things, that their focus is somewhere else. And then you have to sort of nudge them, hey, how am I going to get into this damn place, Where is the most important thing in my entire life going to be?
I just wanted to clarify about Usonia. It's a term that Wright used to assign to those houses, but there's no consensus really on what that term means, although people do say it stands for United States of North America. And Wright invented that term, carport. He took porte cochere and turned it into English and gave us carport. And he also said that every house should be as unique as the people that are going to live in it. So just a few things to throw out about the three-named man.
Ask the question really slowly, just because the mic sort of reverberates.
This goes all over the place.
Okay, I'm not going to ask a question. I'm going to say something. Regarding carports, I refer everybody to an essay by J.B. Jackson called The Domestication of the Garage. Yeah. And it's all about how, over time, Americans have taken, the stable where the horses were and incorporated gradually over time as the automobile became more important. They incorporated, the parking of the car into more and more an integral part of the house, so that today, many people enter their home through the garage.
Yeah. No, definitely. I mean, one of the things is that if you do look at, just like the images I have here, what is the really dominant image is on the one on the right there, but it's where you park your car. And that you find in so many, subdivisions, the garage is up there in the very damn front and so forth of it, and it's really important. The other thing is the garage is where you can stick all your junk and so forth.
Hi. I'm fascinated. I think you said the place you live in helps define you. Did you say something like that? And if you did, can you say further? And then I want to comment on the place that I live in.
The place that you live defines you.
Yeah. Yes. Yes, well, I think it is. I mean, our identity, what does create us our identity? Okay, it's how we dress, how our hair is done, but also it is our house. Well, our car is an identity, but also our house is certainly, or where it is that we live, and how we furnish the interior says a lot about us. I mean, do we have any taste, or do we have nothing, Are we a junker? Just accumulate stuff, or do we have some sort of an organization?
Okay, did you say anything about apartments?
What?
About apartments.
Oh, apartments. Well, yeah, but apartments too. I mean, you have to be a little careful here, but I do think that when you say, okay, come visit me, the building you're in says something about it, who you are, and maybe not quite the same way as a house, but it does say something, and especially when you get into the apartment, I mean, what is hanging on the wall? Anything? Or just a piece of junk? Or a piece of modern art? I mean, that says, again, something about who you are and what the furniture is. Is the furniture comfortable, uncomfortable? If it's uncomfortable, it's modern, and anyway.
Thanks so much,
Okay.
Richard. Thank you all for your questions.
Thank you.